Okay, we're ready to start. So again, I want to say thank you very much. My name is Terry Ryan, and I am Vice President of the Thomas B. Ford co-hosts of this event. And I want to say first, thanks to all of you for sticking around for this panel. And I also want to say thanks again to the first panel and the panelists, because they were truly fantastic. And what we want to do with this panel is really kind of bring to Ohio some of the issues, some of the concerns, some of the opportunities, some of the excitement that we heard in the previous panel. And so to do that, we have a really excellent panel of Ohioans here. Steve Dakin, who is superintendent of Reynoldsburg City Schools. He's truly one of the state's most innovative educational leaders, and somebody who has been spending time working on some of the issues that we've talked about already up to this point, and he's going to tell us more. And then we have Susan Stagner, who is probably is knowledgeable about sort of the practical realities of digital learning, blended learning, and how to, as anybody that I know, not only in the state but in the country. And so what's fascinating about Susan is that she actually has a degree in electrical engineering as an undergrad, and then an MBA. And it's kind of melding those two together is really kind of what we're all trying to do. How do you bring the technical, the business, and the human side of this together? I think she's got sort of fantastic background for that. Then we have Representative Derrickson, who is from just outside of Butler County. Am I remembering this right? And is a businessman, an entrepreneur, brings a really interesting perspective to this, and is also involved in the task force on work and development in this state, actually is chair of that task force. I think that's a really important perspective to bring to this conversation as well, because at the end of the day, this is about sort of the development of our kids and the development of our future workforce. And then we have Senator Peggy Lehner, who is chair of the Senate Ed Committee. She is probably the most passionate lawmaker I've ever met when it comes to issues around children and education. She is a grandmother of 10 and is somebody who I think is driven by evidence. And so she's also my senator from Kettering. And so it's a fantastic panel. With that, I'm going to try to find time to get you all engaged in this conversation as well, and to have you give your questions. Real quickly, I'd like to ask just a survey of the folks in the audience. Can you please tell me who, if you're an administrator, raise your hand. School administrator, okay, thank you. If you're a school principal, can you please raise your hand? Great. And if you're a teacher, can you please raise your hand? Okay. And if you're something other, let's say business, philanthropy, lawmaker, please raise your hand. Okay, so that's a nice mix here that we have. Thank you for doing that. So I'm going to start with you, Steve. Give us a sense of how Reynoldsburg is taking advantage of the opportunities of the digital world. I mean, I know you guys are already doing some of this work. To help us understand what you're doing, help us understand what's going well, help us understand your fears, help us understand sort of where you're banging your head.
Okay, so this is the time I just air my dirty laundry. Is that what you're saying, Terry? Okay, this is it.
I've given you the opportunity.
Great,
it's all being videotaped
super.
and broadcast around the world.
Saves a lot of therapy for me. First of all, let me just say this, Terry. There's a whole lot of folks sitting in the audience that I know and so forth who are doing great things in schools, and that's the huge challenge all of us have. And I'm just fortunate to be in a district where I have really great principals and teachers. And I just need to say that because I'm just the pretty face to the district. But we have great teachers and principals who are not afraid of doing what's in the best interest of children. We really came down this. And I just have to be completely candid with how we got to it. I'm a little bit of a technology geek myself, so I've always understood the promise that technology might hold for us. But we're a district that's changed dramatically over 15 years. We serve about 6,100 students pre-K 12. Our demographics were about 55% minority, with the minority population is African American, about 43% Caucasian. We have almost 50% of our kids on free and reduced lunch, and that's changed dramatically over the last 5 to 10 years. And so we have 57 different languages and dialect that are spoken in our district, and so forth. And yet with the latest report card, we're very proud to say that we've never done better. We hit all 26 indicators, and hit our highest PI performance index. So in one sense, and then faced with the real challenge for us is the fact that we've reduced $24 million in expenditures out of a $55 million budget over the last 4 years in the district than we had 4 years ago. So we've looked at this and we said, you know what, we fundamentally have to do something different. And so we looked at the notion of technology and I'll be honest, it was an economic issue when we first looked at it. And that is, we found out, I was so tired of cutting opportunities for children that I challenged our principals and teachers. How can we do this differently? How can we provide opportunities for kids? We also sponsor 4 community schools, and one of our community schools is Virtual Community School of Ohio. It's a K-12 online school. So when we sat down and renewed the contract with VCS, we built in seats as part of our sponsorship of VCS. And so we bartered the sponsorship opportunities for additional online opportunities. We contracted with Apex to do some additional online learning for us. But then fundamentally, I think Susan really hit it on the head. For me, this wasn't about the incorporation of technology. It was about transforming what teachers do with kids in the classroom and around the framework of the classroom, however way we want to define it. And so we initiated a number of things around programmatic changes. We adopted problem-based learning and the rigor relevance framework as a means to get the kids toward the continuum of application. And that's really where we started. And currently we have about, this year we're poised to award about 623 credits with a combination of online learning, blended learning, and brick and mortar classroom. Next year, we believe we're going to be ratcheting that up to about 1,400 because we are now going to be a K-12 STEM school district. We're going to have about 1,500 kids enrolled in STEM education in Reynoldsburg next year, and our high school is going to move toward a blended model. And we started around the peripheral. So elective courses, credit recovery, all those things that those opportunities were no longer available for kids, we made it available through those kinds of mechanisms.
So in sum, while you've cut your budget in half, you've created a sort of a portfolio approach to education in your district. You've launched a series of innovative schools, high school programs. So while you've been cutting, you've actually been doing more and more.
Yeah, it's kind of oxymoronic. Why you cut, you expand. But
it's hopeful.
Well, it is hopeful because in the end, for us, it's about ensuring children have opportunities, high-quality opportunities. We're a huge choice, and the way that we've introduced this in Reynoldsburg is through choice. We have 4 academies that constitute our high school educational opportunities and students grades 9 through 12, so they can choose which academy they want to go to. It's a thematically based opportunity. So we've introduced blended learning in our STEM academy. And because we hear from folks that we're not ready for the blended thing, we're not ready for online, we want a more traditional brick and mortar. Well, you have 2 other academies that are more traditional like, and you can access those academies if you want. So I found internal choice, to be a huge opportunity for us to introduce the transformation of teaching and learning.
So, Susan, as a leader of one of the states and really the nation's largest and most successful online charter schools, you've been working with districts, you've been working with parochial schools, you've been working with others to help them create a blended learning approach. So can you say sort of who you're working with? Give us a sense of what you're doing, what you're learning, and also what states are most friendly to what you're trying to do, and why are they more friendly than others? And then, if I could ask you, I don't want to put you on the spot, but where would you place Ohio in terms of its friendliness to the sorts of reforms that we've been talking about here?
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. I think I'm also a member of the Digital Task Force, and very proud of the work that group's doing. Looking forward to us putting that forth to the legislature, and a lot of what was talked about by the previous national panel have been the part of our discussion. Connections Academy operates in 23 states, full-time virtual schools. Those partnerships are either with charter schools or with district partners. Sometimes they're actually state-led through the Department of Ed programs themselves. We got started in 2001, and now what we're starting to see, obviously, is a mainstreaming of online learning to become more than just the full-time model, that we're starting to see the blended models that was already discussed earlier. Conversations are coming from all angles. A lot of faith-based organizations, private schools want to have conversations about it, and it's not just any one faith. Everyone you can think of that's out there wants to start a program specific to their population of students. The other thing that we're seeing is, great institutions such as, Juilliard. We made an announcement yesterday. We were honored to be chosen as the partner with Juilliard to help them develop online musical theory courses along with direct musical instruction. I think, what was thought to be possibly an experiment is no longer an experiment. It's truly going mainstream. And as we know, most kids are not going to be at home. And the full-time virtual model is a great model. There's a lot of kids that need that model. But we all know that most kids are going to be in a building. So what I see, the dilemma in Ohio is we've got to move faster. I have a perspective outside of Ohio, and it concerns me. I think what was great about Ohio in that we had the resource to establish a lot of support systems for our public ed system could be our detriment, in the sense that we heard what was going on in Singapore and some of the other countries who maybe don't have those big institutions because they didn't have the money. Well, now the playing field has been leveled, and we have disruptive technology that's going to allow them to possibly move faster than us. In the meantime, we're going to be still talking about what Susan said. We're going to be having these conversations in Ohio about the institutions or the type of organization. Is it a charter? Is it a district? It is a private school? But at the end of the day, we just have to move faster. We have to move faster in implementing these. When I see states around, other states around the country that are having these conversations, I can't help but point to Indiana. And, they probably 7, 8, 9 years ago were having the same problem in that they could not get collective agreement on how to create an environment that allowed them to move faster with technology, with raising the bar on standards and everything else. And, they've had, in the last year, created an environment that it's very much a part of their strategy, their economic development strategy as a state, to try to attract the best public-private partnerships anywhere in the country and possibly anywhere in the world. And, that kind of a strategy is going to benefit the public education in that state, and it's also going to benefit the students. So they've tried to they've got a lot of wisdom on how to do it full-time, and I think that wisdom will transfer to the blended models if we all agree to sit down and talk about it in a way that's, a non-threatening way. So I think we are very well positioned to be a leader in blended learning, very well positioned. We just have to move, and we have to move quick, and we have to focus on kids, and I think public-private partnerships are going to be huge, because the technology is going to move so fast.
So I want to follow up on that real quick. And one of the things that my foundation does is we actually authorize charter schools. That means we can give birth to charter schools. We've had conversations. Rocket Ship was mentioned a couple times by the previous panel. Fantastic model. It was actually mentioned, Rocket Ship was mentioned by Mayor Bloomberg in his State of the City address. Michigan is actively trying to recruit rocket ship. I know Milwaukee just did a heavy lift to get one rocket ship. We would love to bring rocket ship, but this is a heavy lift, to your point. I mean, it's a competitive process to try to get them excited about, one, coming to Ohio, two, who's going to run these schools? Where do you find the talent? How do you help find the talent? That's a recurring issue and a recurring theme. So this point you make about the competitive nature of this, the folks that are leading the way, Indiana and other places, are actually have a strategy. They're actually putting it in place, and they understand this is a competition for people. It's a competition for resources. You want to make your state, your community, an inviting place for these sorts of innovators and these innovations. And I think with that, Steve, what are some of the barriers that, I mean, you encounter in your work? I mean, what are some of the frustrations that you face? I'm trying to set this so that we can then reach out to the lawmakers and sort of maybe start thinking about how do we start to address them at a political level? Because fundamentally, a lot of these are going to be political challenges and political issues.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think from our perspective, and is this is webcast, so I got to be careful about what I say. There are just some things that we just do, flex credit is a really good example. It was mentioned earlier with Susan in the earlier panel, and while many districts, I think, were very conscious about how they went about to create their policy around flex credit. We always did independent study. We always did ed options under the old standards. And for us, the flex credit leap wasn't a huge leap. And then we started establishing partnerships. I know Susan was talking about public-private partnerships. We have a number of those partnerships, and we started asking ourselves, well, how do kids benefit from these partnerships? And so, for example, Ballet Met, we were fortunate to pass a bond issue a few years ago and build a second high school facility. And as we were doing that, we designed the facility around what was going to happen inside the facility. It's a rare opportunity for folks to do that. But we approached Ballet Met, and we talked to Ballet Met about an opportunity to use our facility for their purposes to offer dance classes to the public. In return, then, I always kind of jokingly say that I don't have any money in Reynoldsburg, but I have really good space. And so we use our space as currency. So we traded our space with Ballet Met. In turn, they come in and provide an instructor for Pilates and yoga during the day, and we give physical education, fine arts credit to kids who take Pilates and yoga. It's a pretty simple concept. It reduces our labor costs, allows opportunities for kids, and Ballet Met has the use of a fine facility to do some things. We have a wonderful relationship with Columbus State Community College, where we traded, again, space for Columbus State to establish a regional learning center at our Livingston Avenue High School campus, where our Bell Academy is going to become an early college high school. So we traded and provided funds up front to renovate. In return, they're going to provide us with professors that will serve to teach both high school and English class, or high school and college coursework for us. Mount Carmel is another example. So the point is that one of the barriers that people face is using flex credit as it was intended to do. It's a wonderful policy. It's a great start. I think to Susan Patrick's point, we need to reduce the hoops that kids have to go through in order to obtain and recognize and be awarded flex credit. And ensure that becomes embedded into the natural experience. I think the other piece, again, is the notion of the Carnegie unit. We're shifting to mastery learning, and one of the impediments to mastery learning is that we're still technically constrained by the operating standards and student-teacher ratios and the definition of school day and school year in the Carnegie unit. And so those are things, and again, flex credit is a way to deal with that, but it shouldn't be the exception. It should be the rule. So I wholly support the notion of moving to mastery-based, competence-based learning, and then deregulate flex credit at the local level so there's not so many hoops to jump through.
So Representative Derrickson and Senator Lehner, so we've heard today this idea that really our funding system is largely archaic when we're thinking about the blended learning models. We've heard that the governance structures get in the way. There are a number of issues related to teacher certification, related to seat time issues, related to other things. I mean, these are heavy lifts. And so I guess the question I'd like to ask both of you is, how do we begin at the legislative level? How do we begin to tackle these? And where does the momentum come from to start to tackle these issues? I mean, there are a lot of interest groups that want to keep things the way they are. That's just the nature of politics in America. But to actually start moving in a direction and the heavy lift that's being described in these conversations that we're having, how do we start that?
Go ahead, 316.
Okay. Well, first off, I think part of the problem is that our structures right now are just totally out of sync with the task in front of us. Someone, I think Karen made the comment earlier this morning that the speed of technology. We just can't kind of keep up with it. And it sort of made me think about the fact, the governor has this concept with the economic development policies that we do business at that we work at the speed of business. And it struck me that our education policy needs to start being conducted at the speed of technological change, which is very, very rapid. And we have structures here that are designed to be very, very slow and take a long time to turn. We don't turn education policy around very quickly, partly because we have so many different departments developing education policy, from the Board of Regents down to the Board of Education, to the Senate has their policies, the House has their policies, and we have early childhood education, you have the governor's policies, and these things are not currently lining up very well when it comes to creating policy. So we need to address that as a state, and I think that's something that we all need to kind of pull together and try to figure out a way that we can work at a different speed. And then I think we have to sort of also change the mindset that we've always had, that we create a set of laws that apply to everyone equally. That education, particularly when you start talking about digital learning, just cannot be a one-size-fits-all policy. And how you figure out how to build flexibility and creativity and innovation into statewide policy is a major, major challenge. It just runs counterintuitive to what we do. So we need to change our mindsets set there as well, and somehow really figure out how, as we make laws around this particular area, that they're not overly prescriptive and really encourage innovation.
I will say, as a member of the House Education Committee, we've been pretty busy lately. And we continue to be busy. That's where I just came from now. We're dealing with Senator Lehner's Senate Bill 316, which has fairly major sweeping education-related policy issues in there and changes. And it's very encouraging that we are tackling a lot. And frankly, in committee yesterday, we all kind of agreed that, wow, this is heavy. This is a heavy lift, and we're really pushing this through pretty quick, almost to the point where we'd like to slow down a little bit. Not to say Ohio hasn't moved quick enough, and Susan, I totally hear you loud and clear. My background is indeed small business, and my background is getting things done, making mistakes plenty of times, but we produced results, and sometimes good, sometimes not. But in this arena, things do move slower, and it's disappointing at times. But I will say, in this General Assembly in particular, that we're seeing things move in a real positive direction, in my opinion. And Terry, you mentioned interest groups. There are plenty of interest groups that would like to keep things status quo, but there are plenty, like yourself, Knowledge Works, and others, who are really, you too are an interest group that influences us. And you too are very active. And we're hearing you loud and clear. And I really think that the actions that you are taking, and organizations like Susan's as well, not only are we listening, but we're actually seeing policy changes as a result of what you're suggesting. A bill that I've had, House Bill 205, which not only provides a definition for blended learning, but allows charters to indeed roll out a blended or a hybrid school, whereas in the state of Ohio we can't do that right now in the charter school system. We've been talking about that for quite some time in the Education Committee, and with Senator Lehner's Bill 316, it's in there, and we're going to be voting on that. And I think probably by the end of next week, House Bill 205, as I once knew it, now it's part of 316 as an amendment, could very well become law. So I'm seeing some real positive changes, things that really, frankly, encourage me. It's taken a long time to get here, but I do believe we're at a time where, Terry, you and others are very effective in what you're sharing, and we're listening.
So is there a question from you all before I keep going? Because I can keep asking questions. But I think if we could have a dialogue with you, that would be fantastic. You want me to just keep going? Okay, so a couple of years ago, my foundation actually surveyed Ohioans on a number of education issues, and we discovered that 3 in 4 Ohioans believe virtual schools are a poor or fair idea when described as schools that get state funding and allow students to do their work at home over the internet under adult supervision. Last night, I was actually at a focus group of parents at a local school district, and this issue of digital learning was brought up, and they were asked about it. And it was fascinating to listen to the parents. They understand that digital learning in schools is something that they have to, that their children need, and that they understand they want it, but they do worry about some of the unintended consequences of digital learning, of some of the challenges, cyberbullying and these issues. It was amazing how the issues that were brought up were all refracted through the lens of their kids, and sort of both the pros and cons. So maybe, Steve, you can give us a sense here of as you've been implementing these reforms and as you've been doing this work, what has been the reaction of your community, and how have you had to explain it to them, and how have they been able to really understand what you're trying to do and own it?
Well, I guess we've always assumed the mantra of innovation for results. I mean, we just don't innovate to innovate. We innovate to ensure kids learn at higher levels, and along with that, we kind of subscribe to the theory of ready, fire, aim. And I think Jim Collins talked about in his book that you shoot bullets out, and if they land and they germinate, then they become cannonballs, and that initiates the change. And that's kind of been our philosophy over long. Not everything's going to work for us when we try it, and when it doesn't, we abandon it and move on and do something else. But I have monthly focus groups with students, and so I constantly try to get feedback, direct feedback from kids. And a couple months ago, I had a focus group where I just asked the students to participate who were involved in either online or blended learning, just to hear directly from them and their experiences. Really interesting conversations, by the way, and I posed a pretty simple question. I said, if you had your choice between a traditional brick and mortar classroom, a blended classroom, or an online experience, what would you choose? And to a student, they said brick and mortar. And then when we dive a little deeper to ask why, it had nothing to do with the concern about technology or that online wasn't a good mechanism to learn or anything like that. All had to do with the interaction between that student and an adult who cared. And we found that out with our dropout credit recovery charter school, that these are kids who are disenfranchised with school, regular school, and so when we created the school, because they're not going to do school the way you and I did school. And last year we graduated 25 out of 26 kids who never would have graduated from high school because they had a caring relationship between an adult and themselves. And I can't underemphasize enough, or overemphasize enough, how important that is in the dynamic of schooling and learning. And so that's what I hear from kids. As long as they have that connectivity with somebody, and there's a socialization piece that we all know about and so forth. So I think from that perspective, those are the kind of things that I hear from kids. And if I could just make a statement about policy, I'm very optimistic about 316. I hope it moves quickly through the legislative process. And secondly, I hope at some point they were serious about where the money goes. And I really believe, and this is not going to make me a big fan of people, I'm sure, I think the money should follow the kid to the classroom. And because I think that one dynamic is going to open the system up. But that's a tough one, and I get it. But I do think that's an opportunity space for us.
Senator Representative, either of you want to give a sense of how you see the school funding, the timing of the school funding conversation, and possible changes to the school funding law?
Well, this is a very, very heavy lift. If it was an easy answer, we would have come up with it years ago. I think the governor had initially thought maybe it was going to be an easier process than it's turned out to be. And as you get deeper and deeper and hear from more people, it becomes increasingly complicated and harder to solve. We're not going to see anything this year. There's no question about that. I think everyone knows that at this point. I think we will see something, a new funding policy come out with the budget next year. So I think we can all just sit back and enjoy the next 6 or 7 months before whatever it is unveiled, and we can all start picking it apart. But it's going to be a while yet.
So did the Digital Learning Task Force, I'm sorry, I read it, but I can't remember, did the Digital Learning Task Force address this issue of funding and start to provide recommendations and ideas for how to, and I guess I'm asking Susan or Representative or Senator?
Sure. I mean, we addressed competency-based learning and the fact that what was mentioned by Susan Patrick, that being a core portion of what we need to look towards. So I think the funding piece of that was also discussed and for consideration when the governor does look at the new funding models for next year.
I don't think we really provided any answers to the
No.
governor, but we certainly, pointed out that it should be competency-based and that needs to be the focus, but.
Yeah.
Many of us lawmakers come here with the full intent to change how we fund our schools. I was one of them, and would still like to see it, but boy, it's a tough one. It's not an easy solution, but I will say that we have here in Ohio a legislature that is fairly committed, not only to addressing it, but trying to fix this. Don't know what that fix is. Any suggestions that you have, we're certainly open to your thoughts.
Brian Hassel has some. We'll have
Everyone in this room has a
do white
thought.
paper.
Yeah, they just want more of it.
Yeah. Aside from that.
So the process, though, because this is important in sort of how we feed in the lessons from the field, how we feed in what we're learning from other states and from other countries, how we feed it into the political process. And so there was the Digital Learning Task Force. I mean, to say a little bit about what processes would be most helpful in trying to help you draft and get through the legislative process thoughtful policies that would help us get to the sort of the digital learning, I don't want to say nirvana, but the hope for landscape that we were talking about earlier.
Well, I think that one of the challenges that we had on the Digital Learning Task Force, and I was a member as well, is just that basic task of defining it, because it's all over the place. It's everywhere from an totally online school to how we use technology in the classroom to just sort of, assist a teacher who's up in the front of the room. And it's everything in between. And a lot of it is something we haven't even dreamt of yet. There are things that we thought we knew 5 years ago are it's not the new reality today is something very different. So I think even in the 6 months that we were working on the task force, definitions were changing and possibilities were changing. So that's why I think if anything came out of that task force, it was the absolutely incredible need for flexibility and ability to change what we're doing and when we're doing it and how we're paying for it and all that.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was going to add, the other thing, I think, first of all, I think just in going through the process, there was hopefully a lot of education that happened for many on the task force and others. Much of what I heard from the national panel were discussions. Ohio did get a Digital Learning Now report, and we used that as a basis, strengths and weaknesses to what we need to do. And I believe, a lot of the points that Tom brought up around the issue of infrastructure and making sure it's there, along with our other panelists. The governor made the announcement about a huge infrastructure investment in the internet, a huge internet investment. So I think with that commitment, that's a very big first step. But I also think, what Senator Lehner said is incredibly important, and this is going to change. And as long as, we have a lot of raising the bar initiatives going on in our general education system, and all of the public schools in the state are going to be held to that raising the bar, whether it's Common Core or Park assessments or new report card So the outcomes, you know, and the accountability is there. And what we need to do is, you know, enable the digital learning to proliferate here while keeping the bar high in quality. And I think we can do that. I think Ohio's got a culture of hardworking folks. We very much are a state that has is a representation of the nation in terms of large cities, rural areas, areas that have the digital divide. But what we need to do is we need to incentivize people to move and to have these conversations and do professional development as fast as possible.
So the Common Core, maybe, Steve, this is a question for you, is your district is starting to move towards the Common Core, which is going to be, in one way, a reboot of a lot of what you do. It's a reboot of the standards, it's a reboot ultimately of the assessments, of the curriculum, of scope and sequence, all that you do. So kind of help us understand how your district is approaching that as an opportunity, and how the technological side of this fits into your planning. That's a good question.
Well,
Does that make sense?
yeah, it's a great question, and I think that we took a step back and asked our teachers, what is it that you aspire to do with kids in a classroom? And our teachers, almost to a person, want to teach. Now, I'm going to redefine what that means, and that is when you think about the Khan Academy, for example, where a child could go out and get their lesson at a time other than the classroom and then come back into the classroom and say, you know what, I've learned how to solve for X. Well, now the teacher says, rather than saying, okay, let's go on to the next concept, teacher says, well, let's have you apply that as a concept. Let's show an application of the solving for X. How does that translate into? That's what teachers have always wanted to do. There's not a lot of teachers I talk to who are comfortable with the age-old proposition that all I do is deliver content.
Right.
And so that's the great hope I see for blended learning and for opportunities like that, is it frees teachers up to do what they inherently always wanted to do, and that is to help kids move and grow. And so I think that's the great promise that I see, particularly for blended, because it still creates that adult advocacy for kids, and at the same time allow teachers to manage the number of kids that they need to have in an increasingly difficult economic environment. And so I'm very optimistic about our opportunity there. To me, I can't get there fast enough.
Susan, has that been your experience too?
Absolutely.
As you're working in the more...
Yep. Yeah, I mean, in the full-time model, that's exactly what we've seen. I mean, if teachers are relieved of delivering content such that we have, you know, really interactive, creative, you know, adaptive curriculums in the future, it's exactly what they can focus on. They're going to focus on problem solving, higher thinking skills, project work. That's what they love to do, and that's where they get the most reward. So
I really do feel for lawmakers in this environment where everything is changing and it's rapid. And so there's the challenge of school funding and rethinking that, reconceptualizing that. And then there's the issue, the accountability issues of how do you try to begin to create workable accountability systems that don't stifle innovation. And so I guess my question to you both is how in your committees and in the conversations, I mean, how I guess, one, how can the outside world be helpful to you in those conversations, groups like ours and others who are here? And what are sort of some of the lessons that you're learning in this process of balancing space for innovation, space for flexibility, but also making sure that we're holding schools accountable and programs accountable for delivering results? It's a tough balancing act.
It is a balancing act, and you know, the more conversation that we have about digital learning and blended curriculums, I think the more attention our public systems are paying to the conversation. And I think to address the accountability question, we as legislators do need to force that somewhat. But I do believe that I think digital learning, blended learning, certainly has become much more. The conversation is taking place much more than it ever has before, and it's because of what you're doing. It's because of our constituencies, the folks that we reflect or are elected by, have said there's got to be other ways, I don't think the status quo is necessarily generally accepted by the population like it once was. I think change is welcomed. And in the conversations that I've certainly had on blended learning, I've not got hardly any argument back. It just makes good sense, no matter what angle you take from it. And obviously the most important angle is learning. How best do our kids learn? And it's pretty easy to go to blended learning. If you want to talk cost, it's pretty easy to go to blended learning and digital learning. So it's not a hard discussion. It was a new discussion maybe a few years ago, but today it's more commonplace, I believe, than it's ever been. Mm-hmm. And Terry, earlier you mentioned how can we help you as legislators. I think Representative Henney is here, Vice Chancellor Cates is here, and there are others who have a lot of interest in this discussion. Maybe not everyone is open-minded about it, but I think many are. And I believe that identifying those people who are willing to encourage the discussion are the folks that you need to maybe spend a little more time with, because we will certainly foster those talks. But the conversation is taking place in our caucuses every day. So the more you can equip us with your direction, your goals, the better off we all are.
I would agree with what Tim has just said. On the accountability piece, I think it's very important for us as lawmakers to not be, as I earlier said, so prescriptive, but rather to set the bar and to put an accountability standards. What do we expect outcomes to be? Mm-hmm. And if we set the outcomes with your input, because I think that's critically important, I might add, but if we set the outcomes and then stand back and let you figure out how to do it, I think that's where we're going to be most successful. And we shouldn't be willing to, we must be willing to change those outcomes from time to time. We can't just sort of create a status quo and say, okay, that's good enough. We have to be able to raise that bar and continually raise the bar. We've got a lot of catching up to do in the global economy and global education comparisons. So we have to move that bar up. But at the same time, we can't set the bar so high in the beginning that nobody's going to go over it. And there's just going to end up with tremendous amount of frustration. So realistic outcomes is a key to it, and then standing back and letting you figure out how to do it.
The issue of data and the challenges with data, I think it was Susan Patrick who brought that up. Somebody from the previous panel brought it up. But it is clear that there are real limitations in terms of our data when it comes to things like getting it at school quality. And these limitations, I think, become more and more exposed as we move towards new standards and new accountability systems. So I think maybe this is a question for you, Steve, to start with. Is sort of, how do you go about talking about the successes of your schools to your community? I mean, I know I've been in your office and I see excellent with distinction banners, and I know that's an important part. But I also know that there's more to it than that you probably talk about. So give us a sense of how you get at school quality in this world that's where the schools are radically starting to change, mm-hmm. and you're putting new ones in place.
Well, and we've been through several. We kind of do the old-fashioned town meeting concept a number of times in our community, particularly when there's big issues that we're wrestling with. Our board just approved an open enrollment policy that took us several months of community meetings to engage in, and that gives us an opportunity to talk about why and what's the opportunity space for us with respect to our performance, and why would we look to do something like that. And so those kinds of engagement pieces, our principals are really adept, and our teachers are really adept of having informed conversations with parents about why we're doing something. I think that's a really important point. But I do want to follow up on something that the Senator said, and I appreciate her perspective on accountability. I want to be accountable for things that I can control. And I think that one of the things that I'm a fan of with 316 and the proposed accountability system is the emphasis on growth and tracking student progress. Our teachers are really, really skilled in Reynoldsburg, and I'm very proud of that. But sometimes we're in a system where there's a great deal of still the lagging system of a focus on inputs is very frustrating. Because it takes away my ability to be flexible and responsive when I have to provide certain kinds of, where certain funds have to go to certain things, and or there's ratios in place that tell me I have to have a certain amount of kids. Those are all very frustrating pieces for those of us who are trying to implement something, because I've got examples in my building where principals have taken completely different approaches to their building and yet got excellent results. So the input piece, I'm a firm believer that you've got to give control to the people closest to kids. And so there are not dictates that come from central office in our district. Our reforms have been bottom up all along, comes from teachers and principals, and because they're closest to the kids. I'll even give you a classic case. We don't have the same math series in third grade in our elementaries. We have 6 elementary schools, and we have 2 different math series in our elementary schools because teachers believed that particular set of tools was important. To us, it wasn't the textbook or the series. It's about what goes on with the teacher with the kid. And if they had confidence in that piece of material, we let them do it. So it's about empowering people at that level to do it. So I think those are our ambassadors who go out and talk to parents and engage parents on why we would look at it. I do think there's a saturation point in our district a little bit because we do a lot of different things and but for all the right reasons, and so I think that's been a challenge for us.
Susan, so in your business, are the teachers coming to you ready to work in a digital learning environment? Are they coming to you ready to work in online schools, or is there sort of a initiation or a redesigning of sort of the teachers that come to you? And give us a sense, if there is, of how you do that.
Sure.
How do you prepare them for the environment that you're putting them into, and how well prepared do they come to you? I think is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think, and I see Marie, raise your hand, Marie Hanna is the principal of Ohio Connections Academy. So anybody wants to get more detail, I'll give you a high level. Yeah, we have, our teachers are coming to us from the classroom, and certainly we like to see if they've got some basic computer skills before they're hired in our program, but we spend a great deal up front on professional development and training teachers how to work in the same exact platform that the kids are working in. And I think that's incredibly important because they in tune become a student. And so, but that is just the upfront training. There's continuous professional development going on consistently and constantly, especially in that first year. And, I think you could say, I used to notice that by December of the first year, teachers from a traditional classroom and a virtual school were really starting to hit their strides. And they almost would become knowledge workers today that we see in industry because their skills, by just the pure immersion in the technology and the use and them starting to translate some of the best practices in the classroom into their own practice, they're different educators at that point. And I think you're going to see that also in the blended model as teachers translate, best practices and instruction into different models of delivery.
So the teacher issues, maybe Senator or Representative, that sort of the ed schools and the development of sort of the human capital into our classrooms. I mean, is this an issue that is being brought to you? Is there a sense that we've got the human capital coming into the schools and the programs that we need, or do we need to upgrade this? And if so, how are we going to do that? Can you give us a sense of the conversations that are going on there?
Home for me is in Oxford, where Miami University is at. So I really do have the privilege of spending a lot of time around the university for a couple of reasons. But recently toured the department with a fairly new dean of education. And this gal is so committed to digital learning and blended learning. I was so encouraged. I frankly went to sit down with her, and this is compliments of Lisa setting up the meeting, but I really went expecting her to be disappointed in my effort on toward blended learning and digital learning efforts, and couldn't have been further from the truth. She was light years ahead of me, and what I knew in her desire to teach teachers how to teach in classrooms other than what I've always known to be a traditional classroom. And they've had a couple programs that they've rolled out there at the university. I watched 3 gals, sophomores, in a virtual classroom-like setting that were so challenged, conversing to a screen, conversing with students and actually sweating because they weren't quite sure how to respond to challenging students. That was just one example, and there are other examples of the teachers learning on a digital-based curriculum, who in turn will graduate with that knowledge. And I was very encouraged by that time. Now, I can only frankly speak to Miami University, but I would hope that other universities around the state are doing similar efforts.
I would agree with your assessment of Miami. I've heard great things coming out of there. I can't really speak to the other schools, but sort of traditionally, schools of education are among some of the slowest moving institutions and the slowest to reform. And many of our teacher prep programs we know are out of date. Some of our licensing requirements are out of date. All of that needs to be looked at. I think there is intense interest on the part of many schools to catch on to the blended learning environment. I'm not sure they're there yet, but I think that is one of the challenges that we need to pay some close attention to. And as Representative Derrickson mentioned, we do have the Vice Chancellor back there in the back of the room. I know he is very interested in this area as well. So I think we are paying attention to it, but I think it's something that needs a bit of catching up on.
So shifting gears to school leaders, Steve, and so you've been creating a new sort of systems approach to education. Some people call it a portfolio approach. You're talking about basically people closest to the kids having real authority and real control over what goes on, and not just taking orders from on high. Are you discovering there's almost like a new breed of school leader here as well we need to be thinking about and trying to create the environment, the support mechanisms for, because I think that's an area that we don't talk a whole lot about, but it seems to me that most of the reforms that we're talking around, digital learning, Common Core, the other things that are going on, building level leadership becomes a huge component of this. First, is that hypothesis correct? And if it is, then how should we be thinking about it?
Well, intuitively, I believe it absolutely is, just based on my own experience. First of all, there is a role for central office in this. Sometimes that gets overlooked.
Say a little more about that.
Well, central offices can deride good school reform because they can act as the keeper of the gate, so to speak, and I think that's problematic. And so superintendents matter, boards of education matter, I'm a working example. I'm really 35. I just look like I'm 75. But it matters about, and to Peggy's point about setting the bar, the same thing happens in a local school district. That's where the board and superintendent are crucial about setting the bar, but then not being prescriptive. And ensuring that there's a standard set, and then getting out of the way of great principals and teachers. And I do think, I've always said in Reynoldsburg, we've called ourselves a site-based managed district for a lot of years. I've kind of recalibrated the term and called it defined autonomy now. But principals are the linchpin position in our district. I have no central office. We don't have curriculum coordinators. We don't have supervisors. We don't have people who are going to oversee the principal. The principal is the linchpin position. And it's blatantly obvious when I have a principal in a building who maybe is less than proficient at his or her job. And we make immediate changes. And I've replaced 5 principals in 4 years. Just because I don't think the principal has a right. There's no property right to that position, and I think that's crucial. Now, having said that, teachers can really flourish with great principals. I mean, they can, because the conditions are set in the building for their growth, their collaboration, their opportunity to innovate and create. When you have that kind of principal sitting in that chair, the problem I have in Ohio right now is that the principal pool is shrinking. as the superintendent pool is shrinking. And I worry about the next level of leadership that becomes available. We're now in a position where we grow our own. And we identify talented people in our organization, and we say we're going to invest in that person, and we're going to groom them to be a principal in our district. That's not to say we don't look outside for talent, because I believe talent is the key. But we're finding ourselves in a position where there's not a lot of folks who are getting into that kind of position.
Please, what I would like is go to the mic and just give your name and where you're from, and then ask your question. So let's start over here on the left.
Well, it's more of a comment as a boots-on-the-ground principal right now, as someone who's like living this whole deal. Mike Overby from Wyoming Middle School in Wyoming, Ohio, down in the southwest part of the state. And it's one of these things is how do you prioritize as a building principal? 2 years experience, 7 years as administrator, but we talk about BMI being on our report cards now. We talk about, food services and the changes that are in there. These are little things, but making sure that our kids are safe on the way to school and all the social emotional needs of middle school students. But then we're raising the bar, and I was at a meeting earlier this year with the assistant deputy director of ODE, and he says, your scores are going to tank. Your scores will tank. And he kept saying that over and over again. So as a building principal, you're kind of thinking, how am I going to do all of these things? And with the new evaluation system, possibly see people up to 14 times. So you asked the question that I had just written down. What is the new skill set for being a principal in the buildings? Because I do agree with you that I think the pool is really shrinking. Mm-hmm. So that was my question, was really, what is the skill set? What are we going to need? What am I going to have to be retrained in to be an effective leader with blended online, traditional, keeping the standards high and everything else?
Susan seems to be biting at the bit to
I am.
answer this one.
I'm going to make a shameless plug for Susan Patrick's iNACOL conference, the Virtual School Symposium, because that is the best one event to go to see the best practices in blended and online learning from providers, from school districts, from state departments. There's a policy track for legislators. Susan, remind me of the dates and the place again this year. New Orleans. And what's the date? October 21st. I mean, if you want to immerse yourself 3 days, I've been going to it for the last 10 years. It is the place to be, and you're going to make the right connections for public-private partnerships. You're going to make the right connections for colleagues around the country who are ahead of you in the implementation, and you're going to need that cohort of colleagues on, I think more than anything, culture shifting in your community, in your school, everybody. And not being afraid in the light of raising the bar to do these things.
Do we need to be thinking differently, too, about sort of how we pay principals?
Yes.
I mean, it's almost like they're CEOs of these little mini, increasingly high-tech places, and they're dealing with so many different issues with parents and students and accountability standards and these other things. Steve, are you grappling with that?
Yes, we are, and at the risk of offending anybody who's a central office administrator, I don't mean to offend anybody by saying that, but I want my principals to be the highest paid people in our district. Because I think, first of all, I'm a recovering high school principal. So I know the trials and tribulations of the job. I mean, the best thing we can do is just stamp an S on your chest. I mean, that's the old model. I mean, it used to be, the model was principals kept everything under control and quiet and blah, blah, blah. And then we threw this thing called accountability on top of everybody, and all of a sudden the job exponentially increased. And I think the single most important skill set of a principal is making the ability to improve teachers' instruction. That's the single most important attribute, I believe, of a principal. Somebody who can go in and work with teachers and make them better at teaching and providing instruction. But I would tell you, listen to your kids, listen to your staff, listen to your parents. Those are your constituencies. And in my experience is teachers intuitively know what's good for kids. I have very rarely have I met a teacher who didn't understand that. So I just say, trust their instincts, trust your instinct, and focus on making teachers better at teaching.
John Mulaney, the Nord Family Foundation.
John
I know
Mulaney
who
with the
you are,
Nord
sir.
Family Foundation. Thank you again. This is a great panel. I have a couple of questions. Well, one primary question, but I'm going to get to it. First of all, I'm kind of intrigued by your comment about the lack of, people able to do the jobs. I find it hard to believe that in this environment with working, that the surfeit of talented people in this state of Ohio, that there's not enough people coming to fill in the jobs of leadership in schools. What does that say about the system that they have been trained to work in? We've heard a lot about that today, and all of the obstacles where if I were in that position, who would want to have to deal with that? So we've heard about what the problem is. I think we've done a very good job at diagnosing what the problem is. I think, in an effort to solve problems, we still try and figure out ways we can improve the system as we know it, but we're having a horizon here where we've also talked about innovation in schooling, changes in schooling. That mean radical changes to the brick building, radical changes to the time in which students learn, radical changes to the assessment. So we know that. We see it. So it's innovation. We know that innovation by its nature in the business world, the real innovative leaders embraced risk. Can the public school system embrace that risk? And so my question would be to the people who are on the panel, what was the discussion? Where was your sense of the aversion to risk? And even strongly pointed, where is the fear? Steve, you started the conversation saying, this is a webinar, I have to be careful about what I say. I've talked, no, but I'm just going to follow up.
Tongue-in-cheek, but that's...
Tongue-in-cheek, but I get out to schools all the time in philanthropy, and I can't tell you the number of teachers that I talk with who say, can we have a real conversation? I have to be careful about what I say. Yeah. It's an environment that induces fear. It's an environment that goes against professionals. So my question is, where is the leadership? Where is the ability to get over, to articulate what the fear is? And I don't know what it is. Is it a constituency? Is it interest groups? Is it what? What is keeping Ohio back from the legislators taking the risk that needs to be taken to get us where we need to be? That's my simple question.
So you want to tackle that one, Senator Langer?
Yeah, I would, because it's sort of hitting on one of my real frustrations as an education leader in the state. And I understand the frustration I'm hearing from this principal over here, and I hear it all over the state, and I totally sympathize to it, because I think the way we conduct education policy in this state is like whipping people around. It's the zigzag. Whoever the governor is this year, you're going in this direction, and you can guarantee you the next governor is going to go in this direction, and it's not just the governor.
Videotaped.
It's what?
It's being videotaped.
Right. But it's just the way we are, and until we could come up with an ability to somehow create policy that can endure over administrative changes, I think we're going to continue to increase the frustration level, because it is very difficult to have the expectations for your job performance change on a regular basis. So I think we really need to give some serious thought to changing the structure. One of the things many states are going to is a really strong P to 20 council or P to 16 council that aligns education policies from early childhood through workforce development, and create policies that sort of become embedded in a long-term strategic plan for education that can't just get changed at the whim of who's ever holding political office that particular year. So I sympathize, but...
Representative Derrickson wants to.
Okay. I'll be quick. I liken where we are in education much to what we've recently learned here in Ohio with workforce development. We've got a system in workforce development that has evolved over the years, and everyone's trying to do their best at serving a given constituency or a given group. And all of a sudden we've realized, wow, we've got lots of folks serving lots of different silos, different constituencies. We really ought to figure out what we're doing here and see who's overlapping, see where the money's going, if it's an efficiently run system or not. And in regards to workforce development, we've identified that it's not. So how best do we tackle that? We encourage Congress to reauthorize the Workforce Investment Act. We establish a new cabinet-level position in the governor's office, and we're trying to collect data now, and we're going to share that data, and we're going to see where the money's flowing, and we're finally going to get our arms around this thing that we've called workforce development. I don't think education's a bit different. I think here we are. We've done the same thing for lots of years, and we've recognized maybe there is a better way. And we've recognized that because of folks like yourselves, Fordham, Knowledge Works. The light's kind of gone off. To change it overnight, it just doesn't happen. This place moves pretty slow. But a day doesn't go by that we don't talk about changes in the educational field. So we're making progress. I'm sure it's not enough or not fast enough for probably anybody in this room, but we're trying. So, we have to tell ourselves to be somewhat patient because we'd like to see change. This is the choir, and you know that. But people we're open to the discussion, and we are seeing more change. School choice, Chad is back here, made more progress. I can't speak for him, but my guess is made more progress with school choice in the last couple of years than have in many years leading up to this. So we're accelerating that change. It's just not as quick as what many would like.
Thank you. Steve, you wanted to?
Well, just from a local perspective, policy is so crucial for those of us in the field who are dealing with the day-to-day issues. I report to 5 board members who are elected by their community. And one of the challenges that we have is moving our community to a point, I don't think it's unique to the particular community that I live in, but moving our community to the point where they demand these kinds of things. I don't think our community is quite there. I don't think a lot of communities are quite there. What was it, Jim Collins wrote the book Good to Great? Good is the enemy of great. We have a lot of good school systems as judged by the current accountability provisions. Now, we've had that debate about that we need to raise the bar to really expose where our kids really are. And that's an important conversation to have. But I can't tell you how important it is to have, and this sounds like a little bit of a cop-out, but the political cover. I expose my political capital a lot in Reynoldsburg when we initiate something that may or may not go well. And then in 2 years, I have to be on the ballot to ask for money. I'll give you a classic case. We talk about one-on-one initiatives, things like that. That's a tough issue for local superintendents to deal with. Just to purchase the hardware is a tough issue to deal with because the minute you do it and you go out for that levy in another year or two, people are going to say, my God, you're spending my money extravagantly. I can't believe you bought iPads for every kid in your district. So it takes courage and risk-taking on the part of superintendent and board to go after these things. And it's not a cop-out. God knows I innovate with the best of them, I think. But it is a tough thing to do for a lot of local school boards and superintendents. And that's why policy at the state level is really, really important. Not that we can always point and blame, oh, gosh, we have to do this. But nonetheless, it gives you the cover, it gives you the political capital to do that. And I'm just being very candid about the reality that I think that faces a lot of superintendents and school boards.
So the takeaway is you need more accountability and more pressure.
I need more accountability. I want accountability. I invite accountability. I want less direction on how to do it. Less on the input side,
Right.
More on the outcome side.
This has been a fantastic panel. There's probably time for one more question, and then Tom Vander Ark is going to come up. Please.
And I got that question for
Okay.
you, okay? We were talking about risk. The one thing, and I think everybody in here would agree that the one thing particularly parents don't want to have risk to their kids.
That's right.
So when you make policy and you do policy, I'm hearkening back to things like Jared's Law. That was a piece of legislation we all had to deal with. It cost us probably $40,000, $50,000 to comply with that, and then it was gone in a year, and jumping through hoops and a number of other things. It wasn't specifically involved with classroom. it did involve our district. It was something we had to comply with, and there's all those things all the time. So when you're talking about, it's not a business thing, we're not dealing with widgets, we're dealing with kids. And that's, I'm sure we're all aware of that, and we all keep that central to us. You know, when you're talking about risk-taking, I know neighboring states, Michigan, I believe Illinois, they prescribe a digital course that every kid has to take before they graduate from high school. What a great way to mimic real world when you have parents, teachers, kids will be taking those at college. Why don't we look at something like that as a graduation requirement in Ohio? I think that's a kind of, to me, a no-brainer, but it's never come up.
So the question is, why don't we put in place a requirement that students take at least one digital learning?
Yes or no? We're asking for Sarah, because this was actually a question in the digital learning task force, and I can't remember exactly which way we ended up. Do you, Sarah?
You responded yes. The issue is this. Task force members all like the spirit of a requirement for the very reason that you suggested, which is it's a real-world issue right now. So in signaling to folks that these are the kinds of skills that you need to be successful in life, currently and probably moving forward, all the task members agree that that's important. But the rubber met the road in implementation. And so they also unpacked possible unintended consequences of putting in place a requirement right now that would hit districts that have no capacity in technology, no capacity in infrastructure. It would hit districts differentially. What happens when the projection for growth for online learning in courses that students would take, when those if they come online the way they're projected, it will become the norm. And so then you have this minimum requirement that's not reflective. So it picks up these issues of policy change over time and unintended consequences. So what their report will likely say, upon final release, if they all approve it, is something to the effect of, this is the right kind of thing, signaling for preparation for students, but other things will need to be attended to simultaneously for it truly to be successful and meet the intention of what they'd like.
We should introduce Sarah Lux, who was ran the digital learning task force, managed the task force for the Board of Regents for us.
And it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
I think that's that risk thing.
Yeah.
It is.
One other thing I would suggest too is, as you look at restructuring and digital, that maybe some of the red tape that some of the maybe charters and other don't enjoy, that we as public schools have to maintain, maybe a review of that so we become a little bit more agile to make sure that we can meet the needs of the technology and we can meet the needs of the change as we come down the pipe, because that's going to be very certainly necessary here in the next couple of years. So
Yeah,
thank you.
I agree, and you know, those operating virtual charter schools would disagree that there are some input legislation in there now that really serve no purpose for learning, that I think both sides need to be looked at. We've got to look at keeping the bar high but removing the barriers.
Final words? I want to say thank you to all of you for a great panel. Let's give a round of applause. And so, Tom, thank you. Thank you for doing this. We really appreciate you coming here for this.
Well, it's been a great afternoon. Thanks for sticking around. Thanks for a great panel. I appreciate what each of you do in the House, in the Senate, with Connections Academy and running a school district. I want to thank the earlier panel again, Susan and Karen and Brian. Thank you for being here. And thanks to everybody for sticking around. Whether some of you are in startups, some of you are teachers, some of you lead schools, some districts, some policy shops, some foundations. I appreciate the fact that you're here and engaged in trying to figure this out. We are living through what I think is the most profound change in human history. That may prove to be melodramatic, but I don't think so. I think the fact that in this decade, it will be very possible for us to extend high-quality secondary and tertiary education to every young person on this planet. You think about that. We have never had that ability as human beings on this planet to offer a very high-quality secondary education to every student. I mean, just a few minutes ago, we talked about a $100 tab that you could load with open content. In a couple years, that's going to be $50. One of my portfolio companies is called Bridge International. For $4 a month, we're providing extraordinarily good education to kids in the poorest slums of Africa, Kibera, around Nairobi. And I think about the potential to add an inexpensive plastic tablet with open content and the kind of high school education that we're going to be able to offer those kids for $80 or $90 a year. So that's the potential that is right in front of us. The potential to offer every kid in Ohio and every kid on planet Earth a very good education. I think that's the most important thing anybody could work on. I think it's like the best shot at higher levels of peace and prosperity of anything else that I could work on. I mean, that's why I am all in on this shift. I have 6 quick thoughts, and the first is that this shift will happen, with or without you. This is inevitable. This is not a, there was a Mind Shift article this week, and they compared a low-tech school and high-tech school. Oh, these are 2 good schools, maybe it's a choice. Listen, it's happened. Your kids have flipped. A lot of your families have flipped, are growing up digital. It's the only conceivable way that we have of raising our standards and at least doubling the percentage of kids that are college and career ready. My friend Bob Weiss came to that conclusion a couple years ago, wrote this online learning imperative, and I thought it was so elegant, and in a couple pages he could lay out the challenge that we face. And it's why I so appreciate the work that Brian Hassel is doing, Karen is doing, and Susan are doing, because they're thoughtful about helping us leverage technology. So, as school leaders, community leaders, I think all we can really do in this life is to play judo on the world, to shift the forces that are happening and to make stuff happen a little better, a little faster than it would. But this is happening, and we had some comment, your high school, some teachers, I don't use technology. You know what? It is time to lead. It's time for Ohio to put a stake in the ground and say, we are going to be ready 27 months from now to use and fully benefit from online assessments that we're going to use in our classrooms in the 2014-15 school year, and we will be ready at the end of the year to administer new tests that reflect new expectations, that our kids are going to be ready to read complex text and to write lots on their end of year assessment. I've spent the whole first quarter trying to make sure that those assessments are as good as promised. I ran a competition for automated essay scoring, and that was in part to support the efforts that these 2 consortia, it will allow them to offer a lot of writing on those tests. And what I'm really excited about is just the potential for kids to write a lot every day across the curriculum and get structured feedback. I want kids writing 1,500 words a week, not 1,500 words a semester. And we're going to be able to do that. The shift to big data is hard for people to get their arms around, but because we have, as Karen mentioned, we've suffered in this period of data poverty for the last 15 years, where we've used cheap 1950 psychometrics to try to make a lot of important decisions about the quality of our schools, about the matriculation of our students, about the performance of our teachers, and it's been a challenge. It's frustrating. It's, we heard a local chapter president talk about the frustration of using a limited amount of data to use these to make high stakes decisions. But what's going to happen in this decade is that we're going to shift from data poverty to data abundance, to a lot more data than we have ever imagined having about our kids, about how they're performing, and about what experiences produce the most persistence and the most performance. I am very enthusiastic about the potential to better inform the practice of teaching and learning. I want to talk about Kieran's comment about change, and I want us to think about ourselves as fish and not tankers. I think that's a cool metaphor. If you're a system leader or a system thinker, we have to figure out how to do this faster than we have in traditional ways. I realized as a school superintendent, after my first 3 years, I looked back at my 3-year plan and thought, wow, it's going to take 10 years to do my 3-year plan, because things don't happen that quickly. But here's what's changing. Kids and teachers and parents are finding and using new tools. Where states and districts allow, kids are blending their own learning. They're taking online courses. They're finding Khan Academy and learning it at night. We started a company 3 years ago called Edmodo, and there's now 7 million kids using it, probably 800,000 teachers. It's all been teacher adoption. It's like Facebook for a classroom. It's super easy to use. It makes it easy for teachers to grab content, to mash it up, to drop it in a stream, to differentiate it for different kinds of groups. You don't need an instruction manual to make the darn thing work. And so we're seeing this whole new bottoms-up change process that's happening, where kids are blending their learning, where teachers are blending their classrooms. We have to take advantage of that. We have to let kids and teachers, we have to unleash them while we also are changing our systems. And I want to underscore some things that Brian said a couple times, that new schools are so important. That's why, you know, some of the work that KnowledgeWorks has done here of not only trying to improve existing schools, but also starting exciting new schools, STEM schools and early college schools. And now with providers like Connections, it's so easy to start a new small school and offer a wide range of courses. So top-down and bottom-up change are the only way this happens. I want to underscore something that the superintendent said. He talked about thinking about school as a verb. Now, this is a challenging subject, but what is happening is we've always thought about school as a place, but we're shifting to a time when learning will be comprised of a set of personal digital learning services. And some of those are going to be deeply rooted in a community. They'll be connected to a community. They'll be rich, community-connected experiences and thick support systems for teachers and kids. But some are going to be statewide or regional or global services. So there'll be this mixture of highly local and global. And that's going to mean an unbundling of the way we pay for education, and that's going to be an unpleasant experience for a lot of superintendents and school boards to go through that transition. And I want to say thank you to Terry and Fordham. You guys are like the only people in America that are talking about this stuff. The fact that we haven't organized education in America in a way to fully take advantage of the digital learning opportunity. We have a strange and anachronistic governance system. It's unusual in the world. Nobody else does it this way. And it's had some advantages, but it has some significant disadvantages given all the new opportunities that we're seeing. And Ohio, like every other state, is going to have to struggle with this issue. So the sixth thing that I want to talk about is, earlier I said, mea culpa for the state of ed tech, but it is getting better really fast. So in the last couple of years, I've helped to put a fund together that supported startup companies. And here's just a couple, in addition to Edmodo, we've got a bunch that are focused on Common Core, like Learn Zillion, which is lessons, video lessons for teachers, Mastery Connect, which is Common Core assessments, Bloomboard, which is a free teacher evaluation service with a big library of online PD, StudySync, which models Common Core discourse around great literature, SchoolTube, which is a great way for kids to produce videos and to share those, Junio, which is a big data shop. Steve Shetler, who was one of the founders of Zynga, is now taking that sort of big data mentality to education. Class Dojo, a cool little startup that's making it really easy for teachers to manage their classroom and to teach character. Desmos and Show Me, two really cool presentation softwares that allow any teacher to be the next Saul Khan. Chromatic, which is reinventing the way we teach music. Verbling, which is a new language learning software. Udemy, which allows anybody to teach anybody anything to anyone. It's a great online market for learning. General Assembly and Block, these are companies that are reinventing post-secondary education. And if you go to Getting Smart, you'll also see some of our advocacy partners like Curriculum Associates that just launched iReady, which is a very cool K-8 adaptive assessment and instruction. Your superintendent asked about that, and I think that's a fantastic program. Compass and NWA have a similar partnership, so adaptive assessment plus instruction. You have Khan Academy, you have CK12, which is a great free resource for high school science and math. You have National Repository of Open Content and Hippocampus. These are great free resources. So you have this explosion of really extraordinary apps that are being developed by talent that's coming into our sector that is very exciting. The resource base is getting better every single month. So I do want to leave you on with an optimistic sense that the tool set will be much better 12 months from now than it is today. Let me just recap some of the resources that we talked about today. We talked about gettingsmart.com. I write there every day. I'd be happy to have it. .org is really a terrific site. I've used it in a lot of staff study discussions. We ask people to spend a half hour on that site at night and then come back and talk about what it means for your school or your organization. DigitalLearningNow.com, Brian mentioned that's an initiative that I put together a couple years ago with Jeb Bush and Bob Weiss. It lays out a 10-point policy framework for digital learning. OpportunityCulture.org is a terrific resource for rethinking staffing in a way that leverages talent and technology. I mentioned InnoSight, InnoSightInstitute.org and their reports on blended learning. And then CompetencyWorks.org from iNACOL. So a lot of great resources have been mentioned today. All of them towards this end. We have a chance in this decade to create schools that work better for Ohio kids. We also have a chance to create schools that work better for teachers, to create better working conditions and better career opportunities for teachers, to make this a much more attractive sector. It's exciting, but it's complicated. I mean, I fully appreciate that. And you're learning with each other, and we all look forward to doing what we can to support your efforts. Thanks.
Thank you.